One thing we can say about the open theology proponents is that they have insisted, and I don't think wrongly, that a great abundance of scripture can be called in to support this position. I've already, thrown out a couple from Genesis and one from Exodus that I find interesting. And I know I ended with the previous video with the language of, I know the plans I have for you, I suppose, O Israel, or something like that. Here's some stuff earlier from Jeremiah. I'm just going to read a little bit here. This is Jeremiah 7, starting at verse 5. And this is the word of the Lord through Jeremiah to the people of Israel. If you truly amend your ways and your doings, if you truly act justly with one another, if you do not oppress the alien, the orphan, and the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not go after other gods to your own hurt, then I will dwell with you in this place, in the land that I gave of old to your ancestors forever and ever. That's a lot of ifs. As my neighborhood, my next door neighbor when I was a kid in Othello, Washington, Brian Thomas used to say, and I've remembered, if is a little word, but it makes a big difference. So we have this long list of ifs that if Israel does these things, then God will dwell with them in the land of Israel. If not, not so good. And it turns out that, often people will say, well, what about all the prophecies? I'm not going to try to do them one by one or any such thing. I am going to say that often there is a misunderstanding of prophecies in the Old Testament. I'm not going to say this covers all contingencies, but most of the prophetic utterances in the Old Testament involve a conditional future, a little like this in Jeremiah, like this, O Israel, if you continue in these wicked ways of yours, if you continue to contribute to the problem of evil. I mean, isn't it interesting, these things? If you act justly with one another, well, what happens when we don't? Well, it's bad. If you don't oppress the stranger, the non-Israelite, I wonder if that guy that's running for, well, it doesn't really matter because this is not addressed to the United States of America, but it is addressed to Israel and by extension to the church. And we are not to oppress the alien or stranger, the orphan and the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place. Of course, the shedding of innocent blood is great harm. And, you run into people that will say, like, well, why does God allow all this and this and this and that? And so much of it is this stuff right here, where, in fact, it's contrary to what God desires. And God has called a people to represent God's will and ways in social existence together, whether we're talking about Israel or the church or both. And God does not feed us or force us to comply, right? So we get a little bit later in Jeremiah. I've marked a couple passages. I remember that actually, it's been a couple years ago, I was kind of doing a pretty close reading of Jeremiah. Actually, I don't want to sound overly holy or anything, but for my devotional reading. And I was just struck by how often, this is just a little bit of it. I just couldn't believe how much there was that really lent itself to an openness theology. So in 17, God speaks through, or the Lord said to me, go stand at the people's gate in Jerusalem and speak to those who enter by those gates. Thus says the Lord. So now I'm at verse 21 of chapter 17. For the sake of your lives, take care that you do not bear a burden on the Sabbath day, or bring it in, whatever the burden is, by the gates of Jerusalem. Do not carry a burden out of your houses on the Sabbath or do any work, but keep the Sabbath day holy, as I commanded your ancestors. So notice the logic of a command. God makes a command, in this case, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, which already implies that people have a choice. For God to command something means it's what God desires, but it also implies that people may do something different. So in fact, yet they did not listen or incline their ear. They stiffened their necks and would not hear or receive instruction. So it goes on with the same kind of warning for the contemporary people of Jerusalem. So verse 27, if you do not listen to me to keep the Sabbath day holy and to carry in no burden through the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then, another if then I will kindle a fire in its gates. It shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem and shall not be quenched. Fire in its gates, fire that shall not be quenched. A very hellish picture, but one that has to do with the Israelites. A warning, right? So God is issuing a warning to the people of Jerusalem, if not all of Judea. And again, it strongly implies, if not proves, that the portrait of God in this case is a God for whom the future is open, and a great deal of that openness depends on the people of Israel in their response to God's commands. A little in chapter 18, verse 7. At one moment I may declare concerning a nation or a kingdom that I will pluck up and break down and destroy it. But if that nation concerning which I have spoken turns from its evil, I will change my mind. I will change my mind about the disaster that I intended to bring on it. There's an interactivity here between God and the people in which the future, I'm going to say again, there's an element of undecidedness about it. And at another moment I may declare concerning a nation or a kingdom that I will build and plant it. But if it does evil in my sight, nor listening to my voice, then I will change my mind about the good that I had intended to do to it. Yeah, that's like open theology just jumping off the pages. I think that may be all that I found in my quick scan. There may have been another, but I guarantee you there's more in Jeremiah. And it's not just Jeremiah, but it happens that there is a number of rather dramatic passages to that effect. How many would one have to pile up before one says, hey, look, it looks like the God of the Bible does not have absolute knowledge of the future. We might be able to say something like, God knows what God intends to do. That's different from knowing the future, though, right? In Sontag, in What Can God Do, Frederick Sontag, this philosopher of religion, I think I talked about a little bit in class. This book being one that I purchased in Kansas City during a book sale. Boy, they used to have this great annual book sale. Oh, my goodness. All the publishers came in, and we just got books at these amazing prices. This is one I got one time, and I think maybe during my senior year, or my last, or maybe my third year in seminary, I spent 4 there. But this chapter, God is not able to predict the future. Of course, you've read it. And this book, I will say again, had quite an impact on me because, Sontag is definitely saying more than he really knows about a lot of things. But, he knows that. And that's part of what makes it fun. It's sort of, let's imagine, a little bit, or let our imaginations play a role here in our theology. And some of us might be going, well, maybe a little more Bible and a little less imagination. But nonetheless, in this, the part I quoted in the story of God. So this book, as I think I mentioned, had quite a deep impact on the kind of style I tried to adopt in this book, whose first edition looks garishly like this. I call it the UFO over Las Vegas version. This happens to be, it says first book off the press. I don't know if I really know that, but it's the one they sent me, and I think they might have said first one off the press. Received August 2nd, 1994. So a lot of this book, and the second edition has such a much nicer cover, and I got to change a lot of the God language away from where they had changed it to a great many male pronouns, and I said, I don't really want that. And the second edition, they said, you can do whatever you want. We just want to put it out in a new edition with a new cover. Do whatever you want inside, which was fun. But the overall theme, in fact, I think in the introduction of the second edition, I talk about the discussion around open theology, and that I was hoping that this book would locate itself a little more intentionally within that discussion. But, so I'm appealing to a lot of biblical material, way more than Sontag, but with a lot of the same intention of presenting God as, I would say an adventurous, risk taker, covenant maker, out of love, desiring cooperation, the thrill of cooperation with finite creatures like us. I guess it's thrilling. And really, finally, let me read you one line that I noticed. Let's see if I can find it quickly here. Yada, 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 yada. Where was that stuff? Load all. Back here. Probably human sin and divine persistence. Yeah. So I quote Sontag on 88, 89. There is... So, let me read one paragraph. It's on page... Well, it wouldn't be the same page. Here we go. Even as God decides to cleanse the world with a flood and begin again, it is striking that God does not junk the project entirely. God is still determined to work with God's partners, these human beings created in the divine image. And in Noah, God finds someone that God can work with. Certainly, this should tell us something about God's deep commitment, a covenantal commitment to making this creation succeed. God persists, and this persistence we call grace. For grace refers, in part, at least, to God's unwillingness ever to give up on us. Perhaps God has thrown himself so enthusiastically, and reminding the reader that enthusiasm comes from the Greek words in God, into the task of creating, that to quit on this task would be to deny God's own character as a creator. And really what's being implied there is, if we think this about God, and this open model seems plausible or even attractive, one must ask serious questions about eschatology, because typical eschatologies would lead us to expect that at some point God does shut down on this project, right? When Jesus comes back, then everything will be made okay. And I think I said it in one of the. I know I'm going long on this one. I hope it'll all record. Eschatology is a very prominent form of theodicy, because what we're postulating with eschatology is God is a good God. This is terrible suffering. It won't be forever. God's ways will be vindicated. God will redeem the world, and all the great stuff that we say. However, then the question becomes, well, is God really serious about this covenantal working, laboring with creatures, with humans? Is it just something God's doing for a little while and we suffer for it while we wait for the great theodicy of, a renewed creation or heaven or whatever you want to style it? The open model, I think at its best, raises the question of having begun this kind of project, this kind of adventure, at what point now would God give up on it or say, that's enough? I've had enough. Too much freedom for these creatures. We'll just say that after the flood, the covenant that God makes is the covenant to sustain creation, like, well, everlastingly. Now, that's no guarantee. We can still screw it up because an open model is also a free will model. And we're veering terribly close to that. But it need not be that way. All right? Well, I'll stop there. Boom.